Welcome to the big picture. We have had an election, and we're still kind of sorting things out a few days later. We need to talk about what this is going to mean to New York State and to the country. And with me to discuss that is political consultant Vic Martucci from Masiello, Martucci and Associates. Let's get right into this discussion.
Okay.
Because it's not what we expected. We expected, or at least I expected, a red wave that was just not going to come. And you were a little bit more accurate. You said it wasn't going to be in this state, that Hochul was still going to have a stronger showing than a lot of people thought.
Yeah.
And let's start with that. She's now going to be governor, an elected governor.
Yes. And to her credit, she had significant headwinds that she was running against, which is an explanation for why the margin was as close as it was. And we talked about this earlier in the week. She's the first upstate governor in over 100 years. That doesn't play well downstate. Number two, you had the national political headwinds. A very unpopular president of her party. A terrible economy, rampant inflation. All of those things were working against her. But there's 3.5 million more Democrats than Republicans in New York State. She got her message out. She worked hard. The Democrats worked hard in pulling out their vote. And in the end, Lee Zeldin did not do as well as he needed to do or was expected to do on Long Island and in the suburbs of New York City, where it was assumed that crime would be the #1 issue, which played to his hand. Governor Hochul won all of the upstate urban counties, Erie County, Monroe, which is Rochester, Onondaga, which is Syracuse, and Albany County. She won in Westchester County, which is the largest suburb of New York City. And she pulled strong numbers out of Long Island. So in the end, that's why she won.
How much of a factor is it in this state that more Democrats get out to vote than more Republicans? I know the Republicans are vastly outnumbered in the state.
Right.
Does the Democrat Party have a better ground game as well, or no?
Well, I think that changes from election cycle to election cycle. In this year, the Republicans did a good job of getting their vote out. But all things being equal, when you're down 3.5 million statewide, if the Democrats do their job, it's difficult to overcome it. Now, what was interesting is that below the statewide races, the Republicans had a good year in New York. They picked up 4 congressional seats and they lead in a 5th. They picked up some state Senate seats and some state assembly seats. So underneath the statewide races, the Republicans had a pretty good night.
Is this going to change anything in the state for the next 4 years, do you think?
I don't think so. We have to see what the final numbers are in the state Senate. There are a lot of mail-in ballots that haven't been counted yet. If the legislature does not have veto-proof majorities, that could change things some. If the governor governs more moderately than the legislature would like. But the Democrats still have solid majorities in both houses of the legislature, and you have a Democrat governor.
Speaking of mail-in votes, let's talk about, in general, the process as it's changed since COVID. And as the result is that a lot of the races in Arizona and some of the other states, they're still counting, and this is days and days afterwards.
Right.
As opposed to Florida, which was a mess in 2000. And Florida basically cleaned up their act. And in one day, by the end of the night, they basically had their count. You know, why can't that be done, number one? What's Florida doing differently than the other states? Is it all this early mail-in voting and such?
Well, remember, elections are state-run.
Right.
Even elections for federal office, they're state-run elections. And so every state has different election laws. So it depends on the makeup of the state legislature and who the governor is in terms of what those election laws are. For example, in Arizona, the Arizona governor is a Republican, and the state legislature is Republican, and they did pass election reform measures. They did not curtail mail-in voting. They chose not to do that. But what they did, and this is the reason why it's taking so long to count the votes, is they require signature verification on every mail-in ballot that comes in, and that's a manual process. They have to look at every ballot and compare the signature on the ballot to the signature on the voter registration card to validate the ballot before it's counted. And they probably will not be done with that process until sometime next week.
You know, that's, to a degree, that affects the country in a few different ways. There's different laws in different states, and the opportunity for nefarious, activities when it comes to ID and to voting by mail, which is a little bit less secure than voting in person and showing up and proving who you are. Constitutional amendments are few and far between, but if it was put to a vote in that process, a constitutional amendment, you think we could get 3/4 of the states, and it beyond that, it's more than that, just that requirement. But do you think we could get an amendment that says, when it comes to federal elections, there has to be a standard?
That's hard to say because it's a double-edged sword, right? I think there's a lot of sentiment in the country that federal elections should be national, and that includes the Electoral College. They would like to see the Electoral College abolished.
But there's a logic behind the Electoral College.
Well,
right?
Sure there is, but there's a logic behind having elections run at the state level, and that's because we're a Republican form of government. We're not a direct democracy. We're a republic of 50 states. No system's perfect. My own personal opinion is that our system is better than any other country in the world.
Yeah.
And I don't know that I'd want to see federal standards for elections. I think that we need to do whatever we can do to preserve federalism in this country, and that is to protect the autonomy of the 50 states.
Okay. The majority in the Senate, nationally now speaking, could be as little as one seat, either way, really. I mean, but if
Right.
it becomes a Republican-dominated Senate and they have a one-vote majority, 51 to 49, does that open the door for a whole bunch of individual senators from fringe states that are very purple, like in Maine or Alaska or wherever, that can hold hostage, the Republicans for various agendas?
Well, there's no question that'll happen. The Democrats have dealt with that for the last several
With
years
Joe Manchin.
on their side with
Right.
Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema from Arizona. And look, my own personal opinion is that those senators are elected to represent their states, not to look at a Republican agenda or a Democrat agenda. They are elected to vote in the interests of their states. And Maine is not Florida. And so Susan Collins will vote in the interests of Maine, not in the interests of the Republican Party. But I also think that's the genius of the Constitution and the way the Founding Fathers set up our democratic republic. And that is that it forces compromise. I personally believe that the less that gets done in Congress, the better it is for the country. There are those that their report card for Congress is, how many bills did you pass? Right. It's not supposed to be easy to make laws.
That's a fascinating dynamic too, is that the approval rate for Congress is, anywhere from 15% to 26%, depending on what poll you look at, and yet people keep on sending incumbents back.
Yeah.
You know, it's almost like we hate Congress, but we'll keep our congressman.
Well, it's the old Tip O'Neill adage, right? All politics are local.
Right.
And people vote for their individual representative in the House, and they vote for their individual senators that represent their state. And there's a lot of factors depending on the year that the election is being held and the political environment in which the election is being held. There's a lot of different factors that go into how people decide to vote. But we are becoming, political parties are becoming less and less important in the political process. It's more about individuals, and it's more about ideology than it is about political parties.
Now, it was widely accepted or expected that there was going to be a red wave, and this was going to be a very, very strong Republican turnout and victory, and it didn't turn out that way.
Right.
And so to go to what you just said, it's individual races and individuals. Why didn't the Republicans do as well under the circumstances, you know, inflation, border, crime, you name it? You know, the vast majority of the country agrees that we're going in the wrong direction.
No question.
And the party in power should be held accountable, but
Yep.
it didn't work out that way.
Right. So getting back to the issue, the point about all politics being local, I think there were three major factors in how the House races turned out this year. Number one, to a lesser extent, abortion. 5 states had abortion referendums on the ballot, and that drew out pro-choice Democrats or voters to vote. Number two, it was that independents did not break for Republicans the way Republicans had anticipated. And even though independents were favorable to Republican candidates on the issues, independents were much more influenced by the quality of the candidate. Frankly, independent voters were turned off by some of the more extreme candidates that the Republicans fielded across the country. And then three, Donald Trump. I just believe that what the country said is, as serious as our problems are nationally in this country, we don't want to go back to those days of crazy. They don't want that political turmoil.
Well, you know, my son Warren has a theory that, you know, this being a center-right nation, the libertarians are the party that basically take away from the conservatives and the Republicans, and in many, many races, they took that 2% or so away that would have been the difference. It's like in Georgia, for instance. You know,
the Libertarian candidate drew 81,000 votes in that Senate race, and the Republican candidate, Herschel Walker, lost by 35,000 votes. So, all things being equal, Herschel Walker should win that runoff. In my opinion, it all depends on what Donald Trump does. If Donald Trump stays out of it, I think Herschel Walker has a very good chance of winning that seat. If he doesn't, like he did the last time, and the Republicans lost both runoff races in Georgia, it'll go the other way.
Okay.
But there's something to the idea of libertarianism, and that is the hypocrisy, in my opinion, of both political parties today is they like a strong, intrusive government when it favors their particular ideology or on a particular issue that bends their way. And libertarians, they're agnostic about that stuff. They want limited government. And I think that's a problem for both parties.
Yeah, we'll get into that in the next segment. We're out of time for this segment, but that's an interesting dynamic because there are all kinds of different parties. We're not just a two-party system, but of all the third parties and fourth parties and fifth parties, we'll have to talk about who's the most influential and kind of skewing the numbers
Sure.
in one direction or another. We'll come back right after this. Interesting conversation. Stay tuned. Okay, welcome back to The Big Picture. We're talking with Vic Martucci, and we're talking about the election and where we go from here. When we left off, we were talking about the libertarians, perhaps skewing the races in a few different states. There are a lot of different parties. The libertarians basically the most influential of all the minor parties, or is that really depend?
Well, again, as I said earlier, I don't think political parties have much influence anymore in American politics. The libertarian ideology, I think, is an influential ideology, particularly among young people. Young people tend to be conservative on economic issues and liberal on social issues. But what's consistent about their ideology is they don't want government interfering in places where they don't believe it's appropriate for government to interfere. They like a more limited government. They favor a more limited government. Now, that's not to say that every young person is like that. You can't paint with broad brushes. But I think in general, that's probably a fairly safe statement. So. My own personal belief is that I would prefer to see limited government, and I think that, for example, look at what happened to our economy after the shock of shutting down the economy, after the shock of a government shutdown of the economy. We're still not right. We still have supply chain issues. We still have pockets of rampant inflation, and all of that is due to government making an historic intrusion into the operation of our economy. To me, that says a lot, and that talks to the merits of limited government.
Well, I think most of the country, and I'll go out on a limb here, and I'll say the vast majority of the country would agree if you were to talk specifics and get around the messages that they're given. But if you were to talk specifics about the principles behind what we believe, in other words, would you rather have the government spend your money, or would you rather have control of your money? I mean, most people would say, well, yeah, I'd rather spend my money than have the government spend it. Would you rather, do you believe that government runs efficiently? I would think that the vast majority of Americans say, no, there's a lot of waste there. Do you believe that the government makes wise decisions in your personal affairs? You know, whether it's be COVID, or whether the government should tell you whether you can or cannot have an abortion or whatever. I would believe that the vast majority of Americans would say, I would rather be in charge of my personal affairs than have the government tell me what to do. Those are specifics.
One of the founding principles, as the founding fathers were writing the Constitution, is that the more centralized power that exists, the more likely it is there's going to be corruption and tyranny. That's why they settled on a republic of 50 states, right, as opposed to a strong central government. And that tug of war has existed since the founding of our country. But yeah, the political debate isn't always as intelligent as it should be or could be,
or honest,
or honest as it could be or should be, and most elected officials make decisions based on what is going to enable them to maintain political power. That's just human nature. So, for example, that's an argument for term limits, right? But the flip side of term limits is that if you don't have experienced elected officials that understand the machinations of government, unelected bureaucrats run the country.
Now that we're past the midterms, people are going to be talking about 2024. Mm-hmm. Trump has a huge following in the nation. His policies were very successful. People don't, even on the other side, don't attack the results of his policies as president. They vilify him, and they make him out to be a bad guy, and that's the Russian collusion, his character, his tweets, all these things are a character thing, okay? Mm-hmm. And so his enemies, both within the Republican Party and the Democrat Party, concentrate not so much on whether he would do a good job for the country, but do we like this guy?
I think it's time for Donald Trump to step off the stage, and regardless of how you feel about the way Trump behaved as president and the way he behaves today, to me, the bridge too far was what happened on January 6th. Whether he did it overtly or inadvertently, the Capitol was stormed because Donald Trump knowingly created the perception among his followers that the election was stolen without any evidence to support it. And I don't think any good American, any Republican, Democrat, Independent, can look at what happened on January 6th and think that this man should be a president of the United States again. So I think the best thing for him to do is to walk away. That's my personal opinion. I also think that the current president should announce that he's not going to run again, because in my opinion, he took a step too far when in the closing days of the campaign, he looked in the camera and said, Republicans are anti-democratic. If you vote Republican, you're voting against our democracy. That in itself is an anti-democratic behavior. And the rhetoric in this country has reached a level that I can't remember in my lifetime. And I think the country would be better served if both of these presidents walked away in 2024 and allowed some young, fresh candidates to emerge with new ideas and people that have the temperament to be president. And you and I have had this conversation before. I get the argument about President Trump's policies, but in my opinion, the presidency is more than just policy. The temperament of the president is so important because that results in leadership, and the president is elected to represent all of us, not just a certain ideology, not just a certain political party. The president is elected to represent all of us, and the behavior of the last two presidents has frankly been very demoralizing.
Well, we only have about a minute left, and this is where we're going to disagree. I agree that the behavior is problematic, but my main focus, my judgment as to what a president should bring to the office is policy that makes the country the most successful, not only domestically, but in foreign affairs as well. And I can't remember a president, even Ronald Reagan, I can't remember any president that has been as successful in both areas, domestically and in our image overseas, that we're not going to put up with any, of this Putin stuff or this China stuff. He had the strategic knowledge and game plan to bring order worldwide, and it worked during his presidency. And to me, I don't care if it's the devil himself when it comes to behavior, if he makes the country prosperous and if he makes the country safe, or all countries worldwide safe, that to me, beyond anything, is the most important priority.
Phil, I understand that point of view, but I would hearken back to the words of Abraham Lincoln, who said, "A house divided cannot stand." And the behavior of the president, when it divides, if the behavior of the president divides the country, the country cannot be successful.
It's an important element. I will agree with that. You know, there's no denying it. And as a person who liked what Trump did in office, I just cringe every time he opens his mouth in public, because I say, don't go there, please. Don't say those things. You're just giving ammunition to everybody who doesn't think about the policy, but thinks about what a horrible guy you are. You know, and it votes to a great extent are popularity contests. You know, that's what they've become, right or wrong. That's what people think about. You know, do I like this guy? Do I want to see this guy succeed and be there? And he's not a likable guy. What can I say? All right, that's all the time we have for this big picture. Interesting discussion. We're going to have Vic back in the weeks to come once everything gets sorted out, and we will decide or talk about what ramifications this has, both on New York State and the federal government, going forward with foreign policy and the economy and all these things that we've been dealing with for so long, that are in chaos right now, and we'll see where that goes. Thanks for watching The Big Picture, and thank you so much for watching WBBZ. We really appreciate it, and we'll see you next time on The Big Picture.